Okay, so if you think of where we are right now, we were able to successfully build a Flask image, and we did so through our Docker file, installing this, and then doing docker build -t Flask image, and then the current working directory, right? But we had this issue, which is that when it came time to run this command, python3 index.py, there is no index.py file living inside of our image or our container. And the reason why is because, well, we create an index.py file on the host, but not in the image. So that's what we would like to do, is take our index.py file, right, that we have right here. And remember, this guy's pretty good because we can just do python3 index.py, and that has the code to boot up my website. So we want to take this file and somehow move it into our image. So how do we do that? Well, obviously there is a command for it, and that command is copy. So we can say copy this from the host. Okay, so this is the current working directory on the host. We want to copy the index.py file over to the current working directory in the image. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, both the current working directory on the host and the current working directory on the image. But for right now, let's just see if this helps. So I'm going to do // I think this is a little bit better. And then we'll do docker build -t. So we're essentially rebuilding our image. We're going to give it the same name as before. So that was this Flask_image. And then again, we want to do the dot, which says look for a Docker file in the current working directory. And we can see, okay, interesting. So now we're starting again from the base image. I wish this was a little bit later. Okay. Load from the Docker file. Python3 latest, right? So that's notice it's saying step 1 of 3, which is kind of cool. So this is step 1 of 3. Then step 2 of 3 is run pip3 install Flask. That's the second line right here. Then step 3 of 3 is to copy index.py there. And then finally, we are essentially done with our image. So it's, wrapping up our image. And this is what is saving it as. This is essentially that image ID. So now if I just look, I guess, we'll do docker image ls. And there's my, there's my Flask image. And notice it has the same ID as right here, the same starting numbers. Right? Same numbers. So that's what this image right here is the one we just built. Cool. So now let's boot this thing up. Let's in fact do docker run the image name, which is Flask image, and then let's look inside of it. So we'll do bash and we'll do -it, and what we're looking for is to see if that index.py file was successfully moved over there, and there it is. Okay. So now the next thing we should be able to do is just simply run that file. So if you remember, our command already does that for us. So let's run our image, docker run Flask image, and see if that works. And that looks pretty good. But of course, we won't be able to connect to this because this is the port inside the container. So what do we need to do? Docker run -p, let's say 3000 on the host to 5000 in the container. Press return. Let's go here, but we'll change the port, right? Because this is on the host, and it breaks. I was not expecting that. Docker run -p. Oh, I know why. The reason why this breaks is not because of an issue with Docker. It's actually an issue with Flask. Flask does not like you to be able to just have anyone access the application unless you tell it to. So by default, any computer running the application, it's like, all right, that's probably the developer, that's safe. But anyone from the outside world, that is not safe. So the issue that we're running into is that once we're running inside the Docker container, if you go back to here, it thinks essentially that the application is running here. We're trying to access it from a separate to Flask it from Flask's perspective from a separate computer. So the way we can do this is we can say, let's say Flask host 0.0.0.0. So that's the argument we need to provide. So let's see if that will work. We'll do app run host equals 0.0.0.0. This says, hey, don't just let the the computer, the environment that's running the application access the website, but let anyone in the world, any other computer, access that website as well. So let's now rebuild our application. So do docker build-t. So we're rebuilding it. And now we'll do docker run, and we're going to run and map the port 3000 on the host to 5000. And then let's try to go there, but we have to change this port to port 3000, I think. And it's not exactly working, it feels like. Let's go to 3000. There it is. Okay. Why did it say port 0.2? I don't know why. But that did work. Let's try this one more time. Yeah, I don't know why it says port 0.2, but it should be localhost 3000. And you can see this time that works. And I could also go to like localhost 3000, and that also works. So that's pretty great. Okay, so if we look at our Docker file, things look pretty good. And we just saw that we were able to get our website running, so that's great. There's one thing that we should clear up though. Let's go back to our image, and I'm going to do docker run-it flask image bash. So this is going to basically connect to the shell of my Docker image, or boot up a container and connect to that, and we'll stay connected, right? That's what this -it is about. And now let's dig around. So we can see that the index.py file is located in the root directory. And this index.py file is about our Flask application. There might be other files that we also want to add about our Flask application. So they should not just be like in this root level directory, but rather we should move them into a folder. Now, if we did not have Docker, the way we would do this is by doing make directory, and maybe call source, and then move index, and then maybe we would, move index.py into there, or we could like cd into source, and at that point, we could create or add our index.py file. So with Docker, the way that we can automate this process of creating a new directory, changing into that directory, and then adding our index.py file is the following. So we're going to do this through our Docker file. The way to do this is with this work directory command. And what we'll do is just say /source. And that's really it. So this accomplishes a couple of different things. One thing it accomplishes is it will make that new directory, and then it will also change into that directory. So it does both of those steps. And it maintains that current directory throughout the rest of the steps. So now when we go to copy over the index.py file into the current directory in the image, that current directory will be this source directory. Same thing here. When we run this command, we're going to be running it from inside of the source directory. If we ever want to change that directory later on, we can just write another work directory and say maybe cd out of that folder back into the root directory. But this works pretty well. So let's see if we can make that change, right? We changed our Docker file. So this means we need to update the image, and the way to do that is to rebuild the image. So do that with docker build-t flask image. We have to specify the same name as previously if we want to override or update that image. And then we end with what's called the build context, and we'll talk more about that next. So now we're building our image, and now this time, notice, by the way, it looks like it is applying those changes of this work directory .source, copy over the index.py. And now let's try to connect again to my Docker image. And notice this, right? The current directory that we're logged into is that source directory. Why? Because we specified the directory here, right? We kind of updated the current directory in this file. And if we cd out, we see there's, this is where that lives. This source thing lives inside the root directory. Okay, so we just cleared up one issue with Docker, right? We saw how we can create a new folder and then change the working directory, effectively cd into that folder. Let's clear up one other thing, and that is what does it mean? So let's clear up one other thing, and that is when we copy here, notice that we're using a relative path. So how does Docker know where to find this index.py file? Well, the way it knows is when you build the image. Remember, what we're doing is docker build -t Flask Image, and this last argument here is called the build context. So the dot is indicating the build context should be the current working directory. Docker uses the build context for two purposes. One is to look for the Docker file. By default, it looks inside that specified build context. And the second thing that it does is it uses the build context to, when you're copying over the files, it looks relative to the build context. So if you do docker build -t, the name of the image, Flask Image, dot, when we go to copy ./index.py, right, it's relative to the build context. So that's how that works. Okay, that is essentially what we wanted to cover. So we covered a lot of material. In this last lesson, we talked about the working directory and how it allows us to both make a new directory and then also change into that new directory. And we talked about the build context and how the build context tells us where we are copying these files from, right? The relative path is specified from the build context. And we also talked about this copy command, which allows us to pull in files from our host into the Docker image. Great job, guys. We covered a ton of material.